Welcome.
You have done it again.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Do you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. But you have muted.
Yes, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Ibechuliga's. What's going on?
The moment you start, it takes you 30 seconds to be muted.
I think we are ready now. Yes. Gukurahundi Genocide. Before we proceed with our meeting, may I alert you to the presence of our colleagues who are coming from outside the country. We may not be conversant or proficient in our local languages. So I will invite as best as possible that we use the English language during our interaction so that they can pick the conversations that will be taking place during the course of this meeting. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone. Feel very much in business at home, as it were. Thank you very much. All of us, I think, are already in, those that we were waiting for. So we can now begin our meeting. This is how our meeting is going to run. We are going to, shortly, I'm going to introduce Mr. Gifford Spanda to briefly run through what is an organization Ibechuliga is all about, just to introduce to us its objective, its mission, its vision, vis-a-vis the topic that we are gathered to discuss today. Thereafter, we will begin our meeting with our guest speaker, who will make a presentation. After the presentation, we are going to go to our two discussants that I'm going to introduce later on, who will then interact with the presentation by our guest speaker. After that, the guest speaker will come in to respond to the presentations or to the interactions or from discussants. After that, we will have a plenary that is going to be very interactive, for respond to questions, to take comments and so forth. And we will have media who are in attendance, if they so wish, to ask questions that are very relevant, that are topic specific, topic relevant today. Thank you very much. With these opening remarks, I need to stress the fact that today we are gathered here because early in the 1980s, the government of Zimbabwe launched a military operation into Matabeleland and Midland provinces, which were specifically targeting the civilian population of those provinces. The result was thousands of people, thousands and thousands of people who were killed, thousands who were tortured, thousands of women who were raped, thousands of people who were disappeared. And since that time, nothing of substance has happened really. We are still languishing in the lingering socio-economic effects also of the Gukurahundi Genocide. We are still looking for people who disappeared, who were forced to disappear by the operation that killed the people, the Gukurahundi Genocide, as we call it today, because it was a genocide indeed. And because of the Gukurahundi Genocide, there are immense recurring consequences in the socio-economic sectors as well as in the political field. Thousands of people have been, hundreds of thousands of people have been exiled by poverty, by the human rights abuses, by the lack of the rule of law, which is also a consequence of the impunity that developed as a result of not punishing those who carried out the Gukurahundi Genocide. So with these introductions, may I invite Mr. Gukurahundi to come on board and introduce Ipe Zulu, and then we will start our meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Moyer. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Zulu is a non-governmental organization that is in Zimbabwe. It exists in pursuit of justice and truth-telling for the post-independence genocide and human rights abuses in Zimbabwe. We've been in existence since the turn of the century in 2000, but finally registered in 2007. Our work has been predominantly in 3 provinces, that is in 4 provinces, should I say, in North, South, the Midlands, and in Bulawayo. For so many years, we've been in this struggle, and our struggle is for those women that were bayoneted and their babies left to die. It is for those men and women that are buried in shallow graves. Our struggle is for those men that still remain and women that still remain thrown in Balakwe mine. Our battle is for those that disappeared, be it in Slovenia, be it in Gwanda, be it in Cholocho. It is for the 20,000, because we realize that the dead and all others that are disadvantaged by this genocide could not speak for themselves. And we have been standing in the gap in pursuit for this justice, peace, and truth-telling. So in brief, this is what Ipe Zulu has been doing. This is what Ipe Zulu stands for. Thank you, Mr. Ngcobo.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Spanda, for those brief remarks that have introduced Ipe Zulu, an organization that has been at work for the past decade and a half working on this topic. Today's meeting is Zimbabwe at 41, finding a lasting solution to the Gukurahundi Genocide. And to help us through in this discussion with this topic, we have a distinguished guest speaker, Professor Jonathan Moyo, a former Minister of Higher and Tertiary Education, Science and Technology, a distinguished scholar and academic. And after him, we will have interventions by 2 distinguished scholars also, very much schooled in this topic. That will be Pastor Dr. Ray Motsi and Dr. Samukele Hadebe. May I ask Professor Moyo to greet the participants and go into his presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ncube. Before I left where you are, I would have called you Comrade Ncube. But thank you, Mr. Ncube, and good evening, everyone, at least where you are. And good afternoon to those elsewhere whose time zone is different from yours. I'm grateful to you in particular because I've been communicating with you in preparation for this engagement. But grateful to Ipe Zulu for creating this platform, a very important platform to unpack an issue that has remained unresolved for a long time. I suppose in thanking Ibe Chuligazulu in some strange way, we, all of us, should thank the effects, not the substance of the thing, but the effects of the lockdowns we have experienced since March last year, which have made it possible for all of us to discover the virtue of technology, that we can in fact have such an important meeting without a police clearance. And this is particularly significant because those who have followed the excellent work that Ibe Chuligazulu has done over the years know only too well the difficulties you have encountered with the authorities, making it impossible for you to engage in such meaningful meetings. So we thank you, I thank you, and also thank the facility or the technology that has made this possible with minimum problems. Now, the discussion question is about finding a lasting solution to the Gukurahundi Genocide. And in unpacking this question, I'm going to assume a lot of things. And I think that I'm entitled to assume that the audience is familiar with what we are talking about. And if there's anyone in the audience who is not familiar with what we're talking about, that person must be from Mars. Because this issue has been with us in general for 41 years. Because in point of historic fact, it started in 1980. And on Sunday, we as Zimbabweans, wherever we are, will be commemorating our 41st anniversary of Uhuru. And it is very difficult to imagine that there's anyone who has been around for 41 years who does not know about the Gukurahundi Genocide. In particular, the problem has been with us for 34 years, since 1987, when many Zimbabweans, especially those who were affected by this problem, legitimately thought that the historic event of the 22nd December 1987 meant that a solution had been found, and interpreted the Unity Accord as the paradigm or framework for a solution. But sadly, we are today discussing the search for a solution, and not just a solution, but one whose effect will be long-lasting and ideally everlasting. And this is the initial and important criticism, especially criticism of the authorities, that if you have a broader perspective, we have a 41 years old problem. unresolved fundamental problem about the national question, Zimbabwe's national question, a problem that should not have happened in the first place at independence. But secondly, that this problem, which should have been resolved 34 years ago, is still on the back of our body politic. And so the fundamental question, as we seek to unpack the search for a lasting solution, must be, why is it that we have not been able to solve this problem for this long? And why is it necessary that we look for a solution, a lasting solution? I suggest to you that there are 4 reasons why we must find a lasting solution to the Gukurahundi Genocide. The first one is that we must find a lasting solution in the interest of justice for the victims of Gukurahundi. They have not been availed of the justice that you would expect a constitutional democracy would afford them. Or, as I indicated earlier, we rationally expected the Unity Accord to provide. So a lasting solution is necessary in the interest of justice, to accord justice, the victims of Gukurahundi. Secondly, we must find a lasting solution in order to hold accountable the perpetrators of Gukurahundi. That is a necessary consequence of justice. You cannot have justice without holding, especially to the victims of a genocide, without holding accountable the perpetrators of that genocide. And I know there are people who jump up the moment they hear the phrase or term accountability. And they jump up in a manner that reminds us of the old adage that the guilty are always afraid. And they assume all sorts of implications as to what kind of accountability people are looking for, or what accountability would mean. But I'm not having, or I don't have in mind a particular form of accountability, save to say that it is necessary to hold the perpetrators of genocide accountable. It could mean, and it should mean, affording them due process, but with all the consequences that come with it. It might mean jailing them. It might mean requiring them to tell the truth as part of the justice process. Whatever it means is in the end an important detail out of a process, as I will indicate later. But accountability is key. You cannot have a lasting solution without accountability. We also need to find a lasting solution in order to enable the victims of the genocide the opportunity to heal. They cannot heal without a lasting solution. Their wounds have remained open for 34 years, but as I said, in general, for 41 years. Only a lasting solution can bring closure to their wounds. And finally, we must find a lasting solution in order to enable, especially our communities, to reconcile. Reconciliation is not possible without a lasting solution. It is impossible to reconcile on the basis of anecdotes and temporal measures. Now, if in fact it is necessary to have a lasting solution in order to accord justice to the victims, in order to hold the perpetrators accountable, in order to enable the affected communities to reconcile with everyone, themselves and everyone else, and to heal. How then are we to achieve that? Against the background of what we all know, how are justice, accountability, healing, and reconciliation achievable? What is the methodology for achieving them? Because in the end, we are asking this question in order to settle on a methodology that will sit well with everyone who is affected and has something to do with this issue one way or another. Now, sometimes we sit to discuss such things as if there's anything new under the sun, or as if we are the first people to face such questions. And yet, in fact, we are not. And in this particular case, the methodology, and I'm going to proffer a very specific methodology in the end of my intervention, but you don't have to be a rocket scientist to appreciate a very fundamental fact that it is not possible anywhere in the world to resolve a genocidal problem such as Gukurahundi through a method, an approach, a mechanism, a solution that is not based on truth-telling. The most important foundation of a lasting solution to this problem is truth-telling. It is notable that after 34 years, Zimbabwe, our body politic, has failed to appreciate this seemingly straightforward fact that the first step, a journey of 1,000 miles, starts with the first step. You will not arrive to the final mile without taking that first step. And it is important that you don't take a false step away from your destination. You must take that fundamental first step. And in resolving a genocide, the first step that Zimbabweans have failed to take. Perhaps some have refused to take, and others have ensured that it is not taken, is truth-telling. Now, because we are sitting here talking about this after 34 years, but also after a historic constitution-making process in 2013, we have in the background failed attempts that we must now interrogate, failed attempts, or if you want, false steps to deal with the truth-telling issue. We know that in 1983, the state attempted to resolve this problem through a commission of inquiry into what the state preferred to call disturbances in Matabeleland. A commission of inquiry which we generally know or talk about as the Chihambakwe Commission. That was set up in September 1983, and it did its work over a 12-month period and came up with a report in 1984, around September or thereabout. And we know that the report, useful as I would like to think it is, was incomplete from a truth-telling point of view, because the problem we're talking about did not end in 1984. If we assume that it took a historical perspective of starting in 1980, which we know it did not, it focused on 1983 after the deployment of the 5th Brigade in January of that year in Cholocho. So we know that it was not a complete inquiry, given the fact that the genocide continued well beyond 1984. But it is a useful but incomplete exercise, and its incompleteness is made worse by the fact that it was not done to deal with the genocide. It was triggered by concerns that some members of the international community had started raising with the authorities, the government in Harare, and it was to assuage their concerns as opposed to providing a lasting solution to the Gukurahundi genocide. And this fact is further underlined by the knowledge that indeed the genocide continued after the report. But what is even of major concern about that report is that it became a secret report. It has remained secret to this day. I must say, as an individual, to the extent that individuals have their own objectives, one of my objectives when I was in government was to find that report. And I just want to tell those people who like saying, oh, but Moyo was powerful, influential, and so forth. No, I actually measure my powerlessness by my failure to find that report. I tried every trick in the book. Even in 2017, I was still looking for that report. In fact, in 2017, I doubled my efforts to find it because I could now see that the key enforcers of Gukurahundi were looming on the horizon, employing the same old Gukurahundi tactics to grab state power. And that was a very scary prospect. It was very clear to me, especially as I prepared the so-called Blue Ocean document, that the Gukurahundi guys were once again busy. And if there was going to be a transition in Zimbabwe, the last option that I even thought was possible was the option of the Gukurahundi architects and key enforcers grabbing state power. In my wildest dreams, I didn't think that would be possible. But when I saw the possibility and I could see that this possibility had very serious chances of being successful, I started looking for that report in the hope that I would get my hands on it and publish it to stop them. I mean, can you imagine what would have happened instead of publishing Blue Ocean, doing the Blue Ocean documentary? I had actually gotten the Chihambakwe report on my hands and published that. Instead of running into town with the tanks, they would have run out of town without the tanks. But alas, I believe I came very close, but it didn't succeed. Now, one of the relevant facts, parenthetical facts regarding the current government, insofar as it is calling itself a second republic and a new dispensation. If the current government, and I want people in the audience to understand that I make these propositions without prejudice, but in order to shine a spotlight on the issue that we are facing. I have no doubt that if the current government was truly a second republic as opposed to a second round of the first republic, it would have published the Chihambakwe report. It would have recognized that an authenticating fact for its existence as a different republic that is taking the country progressively forward is to be truthful about the darkest period in our country's history. And you can't be truthful without publishing what was done about the only process that was undertaken by the government about a matter of this critical importance in the history of the state. Now, if you ask this government to publish, they would immediately call you all sorts of names. Names that we used to hear in the First Republic. And increasingly worse names. They've even created or christened themselves as new brigades, you know. Warakashi. Endai mono rakashavan. So if you say, no, prove your bona fides by publishing the Chihambakwe report, they would think you are a malcontent. And yet this is the most, or at least one of the most progressive things that this government can still do, by the way. It is losing time, and very soon they will actually lose even the opportunity. But we therefore are here asking this question about finding a lasting solution because, first of all, the previous government did not come forward and tell the truth about the Gukurahundi genocide, and the successor government, which claimed to be a second republic that is giving people more reforms, more rights, does not even want to hear about the term Gukurahundi. It is very notable that both, for the first time in the 41 years of our independence, we have the senior top leadership that doesn't want to even use the word Gukurahundi. They don't want to admit that there was something of this nature. Their preferred approach is to let bygones be bygones. And God knows why anyone thinks that a genocide is a bygone or can be a bygone. A genocide. Can you imagine the Holocaust becoming a bygone? Can you imagine the genocide in Rwanda becoming a bygone? Let's forget about it and move forward. It's more important for us to unite than to divide each other by invoking, bringing up bygones. And you want really to tell me that you are a new dispensation, but you want to call a genocide a bygone. You don't want to be truthful about it. While there is this background of lack of information, lack of truth, which is the necessary ingredient to resolve the problem or to find a lasting solution, which is our topic, we must acknowledge that 41 years later, Zimbabwe at 41, and 34 years after the Unity Accord, there is now a formidable body of knowledge about the Gukurahundi atrocities. We are not sitting here feeling disempowered by the fact that the Chihambakwe Commission report remains a secret. We actually know much more about the Gukurahundi than is in that report. We are no longer looking for that report in order to know what happened, as was the case in September 1984. On 13 April 2021, we would like to know about that report in order to get into the mind of the perpetrators as of that time. But not to get the truth about Gukurahundi. There is now very serious body of information and knowledge about what happens, which body of knowledge makes it possible for us to characterize, define, understand that those atrocities rose to the level of a genocide. And most of this information has come from academic work done outside Zimbabwe, especially in Scandinavian countries by PhD students, graduate students, professors, journalists, but also in the United States. The United States and the Scandinavian countries have been particularly useful in researching this issue, but so have been academics, journalists in Europe, also in the white Commonwealth countries, especially Australia and Canada. And this is a rich dowry of information. There's a lot of it, which has been done by people with no axe to grind. Because the government of Zimbabwe and ZANU-PF mandarins, if they hear that Zulu has produced a report on Gukurahundi, they will make noise even before reading the report. Oh no, useless, those secessionists, and so forth. But we don't need that. If we are looking for a lasting solution, we must look for truthful information. And I suggest to you that there is now very little that is not known about what happened, and that what happened was a genocide because of the amazing body of literature that has come out of graduate, doctoral students, as well as researchers and journalists. And I raised that point just by way of flagging it for the moment, but I will return later to suggest what the implications of this fact about the formidable body of work that has been done. For now, safe to lament the fact that despite boasting of being one of the most literate countries in Africa, at one point enjoying pole position and having a highly educated population and so forth, there is no body of literature that has come from Zimbabwe, produced by Zimbabwean academic institutions. It is very difficult for a Zimbabwean graduate student or a doctoral student in any one of our universities to research on Gukurahundi. If a student comes up with such a topic, they will find it difficult to get a supervisor. If they get a supervisor, that supervisor will become, without their knowledge, a friend of the CIO and the MID. They will want to know which foreigner is funding that student or that supervisor. And that is why we really don't have as good work in terms of a bigger picture done on this, better than what the Catholic Commission for Peace and Justice did years ago. People are afraid. This society, which boasts of highly educated people, is afraid to produce a body of knowledge that is credible, reliable, and can be the basis for truth-telling, which is a requirement for a lasting solution. How are you going to get a solution if what is available is anecdotal, is based on individuals, and not all of the individuals who are affected, some of them who happen to come into contact with IPHU and other organizations working on this, some parts, and we know that organizations like SIDE, run by Zenzele Ndebele, have done a fantastic job to highlight this, but still full of gaps, not sufficient to constitute a foundation for truth-telling. So this is quite a problem. I mentioned the Scandinavian countries. I mentioned Europe, the United States, Australia, and Canada. I should also mention that there has been quite some considerable work by students and other academics in South Africa. And they've done quite some significant work, unlike their brothers and comrades in Zimbabwe. So, as we sit here, what we know about Gukurahundi is anecdotal, as I indicated. Piecemeal. There is no comprehensive body of information that cannot be challenged on factual grounds to kickstart a process towards a final solution. There isn't that. And that is a big problem. Now, while we point out this dearth of information, we must acknowledge that the state has set up, following the adoption of the new constitution in 2013, a National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, whose propaganda is that it is intended to find a lasting solution. And those behind the construction of this commission in 2013 believed that the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission could solve this problem in 10 years. But it is important to remind ourselves, especially those who were either closely involved in that constitution-making exercise or closely followed it if they were not involved. It is important to remember that this was one of the most contentious provisions, the establishment of the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission as an independent commission. To specifically, those who proposed it wanted to find a lasting solution. But I don't know how this discussion went in the other parties, in the MDC Twangirai and in the MDC M. I don't know what the M was, whether it was Mtambara or Mangwe or something like this, I'm not sure. But
Welshman, maybe you can't.
So, you think an insult makes your point, I suppose. But the fact of the matter is...
I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon, sir.
Feel sorry for yourself, because in an intellectual discussion, an insult is just that. But I take your apology. The fact of the matter is there was, to students of politics, a genuine question about MDCM. And prior to that, I think many people took it as just MDC, the real MDC. I don't know what sort of discussions went on in those parties, but I can share with you the discussions that went on in ZANU-PF about the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission. Initially, the proposal was that it should be the National Peace, the National Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And the key words were truth and reconciliation. Truth, because truth invites justice. And as I indicated earlier, you can't find a lasting solution without truth. And to make a long story short, the view, the initial view that let's have a national truth and Truth and Reconciliation Commission was rejected by our, in the first instance, by our management committee or members of our management committee. And in ZANU-PF, the members of the management committee were Mnangagwa and Chinamasa. The coordinators, and our coordinator was Paul Mangwana, reported to the management committee, and that management committee was made up of, they rejected. They thought that the suggestion for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission or Truth and Justice Commission, a commission that was clear that its founding has to do with truth and justice, meant that we should also not just, it meant that we should not look at the period from 1980, but that we should also look at the UDI period and the colonial period. In other words, at the very least, let's go back to 1890. And this was quite telling, because it was as if to say either the victims of Gukurahundi or the communities affected there, in this case, the Matebele land or Zapu, were part of UDI or the colonial period. So, you want us to solve your problem? You need to solve our problems also. It was very strange that they were bringing Lancaster arguments. The arguments that they should have raised at Lancaster with the British government and the Rhodesian government, or the Rhodesia Zimbabwe government as it were now being raised to say, if you are serious about having a Truth and Justice Commission, you should also be willing not to restrict it to the quote-unquote disturbances since 1980, but UDI and what they did in the camps, freedom training camps and so forth. That in itself, seemingly innocuous point, was very telling about the attitude, and also taking into account what has happened, the fact that this was coming from the enforcers, the key enforcers of Gukurahundi. So the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission is not an appropriate methodology to find a lasting solution to the Gukurahundi genocide by design. It is not designed to find a lasting solution. No wonder its own existence is not lasting. I mean, how can you find, as an independent commission, how can you find a lasting solution when you are a temporal structure? It was set up as a political body with lots of problems. One of the problems is its delayed start. There are people who deliberately frustrated the establishment of the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission. And when it finally got started, it did not get the leadership it deserves. If we want to find out how serious anything is in Zimbabwe, look at who is leading it. All the non-serious processes are led by non-serious people who, when they meet the politicians, they are in awe of the politicians, and they start talking about, can you please give me a farm? Can you please give me a scholarship for my grandson? Can you do it? Ah, yes, chef, yes, chef. And when they propose things and they're told, no, it is also, and then they keep quiet. Deliberately, the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission has been staffed by people who, even if they wanted to, cannot rise to the expectations and demands of the responsibility before them. They can't. Why? I know Ncube said we have guests here who don't understand certain terms and so forth, but these people are Ozbanibani, and why would you put Ozbanibani to head the National Peace and Commission? Why? Well, you would because you don't want a lasting solution. You are buying time. You are using the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission to maneuver. That's why it does not have the necessary leadership. Can you imagine? When the South Africans set up their equivalent process, they put Bishop Tutu, a Nobel Peace Laureate, someone with gravitas of his own nationally and internationally. They did not put Vanasiaso. And that's why the process was credible. Credibility is critical for a body of this kind in order to get a lasting solution. Our National Peace and Reconciliation Commission has no credibility at all. And this is not a commentary on the fine men and women at the level of their citizenry, compatriots. But this is not their job. And this, of course, they understand that their job is to frustrate the process. What compounds this fact is that not only does the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission lack the leadership that it deserves, it also lacks the professional skills that are necessary to unpack the issue. In fact, we don't even know who the hell is working there from a professional point of view. And yet the task is about tackling a genocide. We don't know who the professionals are there. They just pick so and so, seconded there by the Ministry of Justice, Legal and Parliamentary. Then, what has been particularly disturbing at this juncture is that, for reasons that are inexplicable, objectively speaking, it has been, the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission has been hijacked by the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs, Mrs. Virginia Mabiza. And she's been running around creating fictitious organizations in Matabeleland, which become collective bodies and give themselves fantastic names overnight, something that has never existed over an issue with such history as this genocide, 34 years after the Unit Accord. And you wake up one day, you find the Herald saying President Mnangagwa met yesterday with the Matabeleland Collective, an organization that brings all NGOs in Matabeleland, blah, blah, blah. And you say, but what is going on? If you think that is not bad enough, I don't need to, it's not my intention to dwell a lot on that, but what has raised eyebrows about the approach or the association of the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission with the Minister of Justice is that in August last year, I think on the 4th of August last year, we suddenly heard from the blues an announcement that the National Peace and Reconciliation Committee of Cabinet, which is obviously serviced by the NPRC as its secretariat, or the one body that does the legwork, has come up with draft principles of something called, which they called the Patriot Bill, which others in ZANU-PF are calling the Patriotic Bill. National peace and reconciliation, you're coming up with the Patriot Bill, which seeks to take away people's freedoms and rights. And if you are aware that this body came up late, the issues are very complex, to try and bring our people together, you then ask yourself, is the reason why we are not making progress on the Gukurahundi front because this thing is busy researching about the Logan Act in America to find ways of jailing people who are communicating with embassies and foreign countries and so forth to bring to their attention their plight. What is the reason? That is enough to say, well, this body is not serious. And another telling fact about how unserious the state or government looks at the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission is that they are very eager to see its life come to an end on the 22nd of August 2023. If they they can get their way, they would want the results of the next election to be announced on the day the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission terminates by operation of the law. Why? Because they've actually, there's an application in the court to extend the life of the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission because it started late and to start counting the 10 years when it started. And the government is opposing that application. And clearly, if they were interested in solving the Gukurahundi issue and finding a lasting solution, they would be the first going to go to Parliament to seek the extension. If they have been running to Parliament to get amendment number 1 to kick out the public from being involved in the appointment of the Chief Justice, the Deputy Chief Justice, and the President or the Judge President of the High Court, and then they have this omnibus amendment number 2 to basically, the amendment number 1 and number 2 is to remove those progressive features of the new constitution to return to the former constitution, the arrangements that obtained in the former constitution. Which is why, if you really are looking seriously for evidence that this is a second round of the First Republic, look at Amendment 1 of the Constitution and Amendment 2, and you'll find that that's what they are doing. I think well-meaning people with no axe to grind would have expected the government and the state to be at the forefront of seeking an amendment of the Constitution. In fact, not just to extend the life of the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, but to make it permanent in the interest of justice. I think the last observation I want to make about this is that it's amazing that on Friday this week, there are going to be interviews to appoint the last commissioners. They will not serve the full 5 years. Their term will end on the 23rd of August in 2023. The last commissioners of the NPRC. If you look at the list of 29, and you can't be, and you don't feel like shedding a tear or so, then there's something wrong with you. And we don't know where those 29 came from, except that it is clear that the majority of them were appointed by some people. There's a form you fill not appointed, they were nominated by some people. And if you go by some of the receptions we've seen at State House, you will understand that something is not right. That you get people like Obed Kutu being received at the State House just a few weeks before their names are put in the newspapers as having been shortlisted. And you say to yourself, you don't have to be against an individual to feel the pain. Because quite frankly, on a personal level, I have nothing against Obed Kutu or anyone else among those 29. But if we have a commission that is about, whose term or tenure is about to expire on the 23rd of of August, on the 22nd of August 2023, you would expect the government to be very serious about who it appoints. Not people who, before the interview, tell the whole world that I'm ZANU-PF. I've come back to ZANU-PF. Perhaps I've always been ZANU-PF, but I want to be a commissioner. The NPRC. This is an insult to the victims. Apart from being a clear signal that this is not about finding a lasting solution. It is a very clear insult to the victims. But for purposes of this discussion, it is a clear indication that there's no desire to find a lasting solution. You don't find a lasting solution this way. There ought to be a better way. So, how do you find a solution? In my view, a lasting solution must be based on the principle that no truth-telling, no lasting solution. No truth-telling, no lasting solution to the Gukurahundi genocide. So far, we can safely say that the truth about Gukurahundi has come from the tears of the dead victims, or from the tragic memories and scars of survivors, or from the archives of the descendants of victims and survivors. So, as I indicated earlier, there is some truth, and I emphasize only some truth. Now, I want to, as I promised, suggest a solution, suggest a way forward. And to that extent, I need to share with you the basis of my suggestion. I think if anyone is going to come into a discussion of this nature, the immediate question that is asked is, who are you? Why should we listen to you? Well, for me, I can contribute to this discussion from a personal level based on what happened to my father, my many other relatives, my friends, to people in our community in Cholocho. I can do that, and I can do that authoritatively. But if I do so, I would only be sharing with you an anecdote. And as I indicated, there are many such anecdotes, and they cannot be the basis for finding a lasting solution. So I choose to do this as someone who was a policy maker in the ruling party to some extent, and the government to a large extent. From about March, April 1999 to February 2000, I was very involved in the Constitutional Commission, as is in the public domain. So while we were doing our work in 1999, which work I had started in April of that year, there was the tragedy of the passing on of Vice President Joshua Nkomo. And then after that tragedy, before his burial, President Mugabe went to Bulawayo, to the family's house, home, the homestead. And when I got to know that there would be a VVIP going there, a flight, I asked if I could get some space. And I was pleased that I got an opportunity to be on that flight. It was my first time to have a close encounter with President Mugabe. I had been in the commission. I was in the commission. This is July 1999. When I shook his hand, that wasn't my first time to shake his hand. I had done so when I was a lecturer at the UZ. Some of my students were ministers, and one of them was Chris Mshowe, who on 2 occasions had given me a card to the State House Christmas party in the 80s, late 80s. It used to be a big deal to attend, no, not Christmas party, New Year's Eve, but it was a big deal to be at State House for the New Year's party and then go to Sheraton for the Londro New Year's party that Mnangagwa used to offer. So I checked his hand once or twice, but this was the first time close encounter. And when we shook hands, I was surprised that he was very warm in greeting me, like wanting to ask me about what's going on in the commission and so forth. And I realized that he watches a lot of television because I was on television a lot those days talking about the commission. When we got there, I was very struck by the approach he took to the Gukurahundi issue. That is the occasion when he described Gukurahundi as a moment of madness. I was there, seated there. And then I saw him interacting with the family of the late vice president and the leadership of ZAPU, PF ZAPU. I maybe shouldn't claim anything about journalism and simply say I am an instinctive journalist. So I like eavesdropping, if I'm within an earshot of some interesting conversation. So I just started, I was amazed what he was telling these people and what he was asking the officials around him to say that this is now a moment to deal with this question. And then I was struck that this was 12 years or so after the Unity Accord. And I couldn't understand why did they not work it out with Joshua Nkomo. Now he's gone and he's desperate to try and find a solution. He's describing publicly the Gukurahundi period as a moment of madness. He's backing instructions to his people to say, come together, let's try and set up a process, let's try and have a committee, let's look into this, let's resolve. It was a very active thing. It's a long story that will be narrated elsewhere, except to say for the purposes of this discussion that it made me think twice again about Mugabe and his take on Gukurahundi. It made me think there was a small window of opportunity to address it. And I got this as a direct experience, first-hand experience. And it weighed on my mind. And I discussed this with some other people, who, including my friends in ZANU PF. Me, I was not ZANU PF at that time, but I was in good, close communication with people like Joshua Malinga, who were very concerned about this Gukurahundi issue and were constantly trying to find ways within ZANU PF of addressing it. And then, that then there was that process which ended, and the following year there was the referendum. It lost, and then there was the general election in June of 2000 after the February loss of the referendum on the Constitutional Commission's draft constitution. And I was asked largely by Morven Mahachi and Olivia Mchena, who were running the commissariat at that time, after they got clearance, obviously, from the party leadership, that I do the manifesto and design the campaign. And my July 1999 encounter with President Mugabe at the homestead of the late Vice President Ncube was very active in my mind. And initially, I thought that I would write a manifesto based on finding a final solution to the Gukurahundi. And I thought there was an opportunity because it was very close to the death of Vice President Ncube. And I thought President Mugabe would be receptive based on what I experienced in Bulawayo in July 1999. And I went on. I used to have, they were calling me the Sheraton professor because I stayed for a long time at the Sheraton, and I had rooms in the 13th floor, and we'd acquired some offices on the 4th floor to run a campaign there. And I went on to produce an initial draft for myself, which put the final solution to Gukurahundi as the major campaign point. But when and then I thought I would get an audience with President Mugabe as part of the drafting. I quickly realized that those I was reporting to didn't want me to have audience with him. They wanted me to submit my proposals to them. And out of talking to them, I realized that this was a non-starter, and we needed to focus on land reform. And then the rest is history. I put aside the solution, the final solution, as the manifesto's premise, and came up with the land is the economy and the economy is land mantra. And Zimbabwe will never be a colony again because of that. So an opportunity to me, based on what I had seen happening, was lost. But after the 2000 election, I was appointed the Minister of Information. Contrary to what people thought then and some think now, I did not have audiences with President Mugabe frequently. I used to have maybe a one-on-one meeting with him once a year. But I would see him regularly, of course, in cabinet every week, barring those times he would be away. And once a month, I would see him in the Politburo. And most of my interactions with President Mugabe were public in the sense that they would be in those meetings. And I would not meet him, I used to wonder. In fact, my permanent secretary used to meet him one-on-one more regularly than me. And they used to have these meetings of high officers and officials on Mondays. Me, no. I never felt that I really needed to do that or to refer or to seek political cover and so forth. I concentrated on my work. But ahead of the 2002, relevant to this discussion, presidential election, because I was asked once again to write the manifesto of the 2002 presidential election. But unlike the 2001, this time I was in government as a Minister of State in the President's office. And I was also Deputy Secretary of Information in the Politburo, deputy to Nathan Chamyarira. This time, I used my office to seek an audience with him to discuss the campaign. And I did this in mid-year, around June, July of 2001. And we had a very long conversation, very long. And by that time, we're running a the Hondo Eminda campaign, Chinks Music, Marcos Vanda's stuff was out there, Mombembiri Madunki Mashanu out there, Sialima, Uyatela, we had put all there, and he was very fascinated about that. And he wanted to build on that, to say, let's now focus on the forthcoming presidential election. And I decided to use the opportunity that I had wanted in 2000 this time, because it was just the two of us and drinking tea. He was in a good mood. He was giving me my marching orders, as it were, and appreciating what I had done to mobilize support for the land reform program, and saying, let us now use that basis to come up with a campaign for the 2002. So I raised the Gukurahundi issue with him. And then I discovered that he had a very soft spot for Cholocho. And the fact that I was from Cholocho was a big deal to him. And he wanted to know where from Cholocho. And stupid me, at that time, it did not occur to me, or I was not quite alive of the fact that he has an important connection with Cholocho in his family. But I then discovered why he also had a soft spot for Cain Matema. And we wanted to find out, because I'm related to Cain Matema, and he was related to Cain Matema because of his father's marriage in Cholocho. And the first thing on that day that struck me was, oh God, you have this fascination and affinity with Cholocho, but you deployed the 5th Brigade in January 1983 in Cholocho. And then I wanted to find out, how did this happen? I mean, how do we deal? Obviously, I was polite, but very direct as we were drinking tea. And when I found out that I was actually very welcome there, and I was being thanked for doing a good job as minister and so forth. So I said, now, if I leave this place without asking about Gukurahundi, our parents will never forgive me. So I took the opportunity. And I was surprised by what he said, and it's relevant to what I'm going to suggest is a final solution. He first decided, he thought I had a wrong conception of what happened. So he sought to correct me. And for purposes of this discussion, I will relate just in quick summary what he said. The first thing he said to me was that sometimes in 1980, thereabout 81, but in 80, he started getting reports directly from the late president of Tanzania, Julius Nyerere, that there had been shipments that had arrived in Dar es Salaam of all sorts of arms equipment destined for ZAPO via Zambia using the Tazara railway line. And he said the first time Nyerere told him that, he kind of didn't believe or thought he can pack it. But when it became, when Nyerere was persistent and with more details in describing those shipments, he says, Tagati vakomana chitarisai. Then I was like, vakomana vapi? And he said, vanamnangagwa. Basically the CIO. And then he said, vakomana vagan tarisa. ndova vadzoka vakati, chef, it's much more serious than you have the information. And then we decided to act. Now, this is relevant because parenthetically I will leave it there and return later to highlight the consequences of the Nyerere intervention, the impact on Kaunda, and then on Zapu, on Nkomo, on the people of Matabeleland, and the involvement of the Rhodesians in the investigation. When he said to tell the people, he meant to let the CIO investigate. But what is important is that there was that involvement. And he says that after we acted, they started getting reports from Nkomo, from Sipa about the situation getting out of hand. And on the basis of those reports, a process started leading to the Unity Accord. Now, President Mugabe told me that he was unhappy and troubled by the fact that the late Vice President Nkomo died before dealing with this question of Gukurahundi. And to make a long story short, I came out of that meeting with a clear understanding that there was no state or ZANU-PF program or agenda to address the Gukurahundi issue. And it was clear that what was not possible to achieve under Nkomo or when Nkomo was alive over 12 years would be very difficult, if not impossible, to achieve without him. And it was also clear that a major reason for that in the assessment of President Mugabe that he shared with me was that the security sector was not interested in revisiting the Gukurahundi issue or opening old wounds. The security sector's view was that the Unity Accord solved the problem. And that therefore it was going to be an uphill struggle. Let me quickly, by the way, I know that time is a major issue. I don't want to put my moderators or host in trouble, but they said to me, take as much as you need to cover everything and to be as comprehensive as the subject requires, because we will not have another opportunity soon. So I was very grateful for that. I'm not wearing my political hat. This is my academic hat. So I'm very conscious of the time and will be closing shortly. But I want to share with you the fact that when it became obvious to me that there was no organized or approach or commitment in government or in the party as shared with me at the highest level to deal with the Gukurahundi issue, I just started thinking, well, you don't get to be in these places every other time. You are here now, and you should use the opportunity to do what you can, networking with like-minded people, playing dead, lying low, but actually doing things to try and address this problem, or to do things which would trigger or necessitate a resolution. And as far as I was concerned, an important dimension that is related to truth-telling as far as genocide is concerned is public communication and knowledge generation. Is what is done by means of public communication, in this case in particular, newspapers and broadcasting on the one hand, which I happened to be superintending. And on the other hand, universities, intellectual institutions. So I decided, as part of a collective process within the ministry, we used to work very well within the ministry then, and it's not possible for me to claim credit for having done anything alone. Whatever I thought of doing, I shared with the management, and those days there was no deputy minister, and we would brainstorm and workshop these ideas as much as possible. And for me, I saw it as a problem that all communication, public communication, was based in Harare. That ZBC was a Harare institution, that Zim Papers was a Harare institution. I was less concerned with Zim Papers because I was aware that it is owned by Mass Media Trust, and there were ways of dealing with that. But I was very concerned about ZBC. It was thoroughly a Harare institution in very concerning ways. So when there was a restructuring exercise, I thought it was opportune to break ZBC into business units and devolve those business units into other communities away from Harare. In particular, I was keen to have Montrose Center as a hub to host an alternative television station. And we set up national television station, NTV, to be based at Montrose, so that it would broadcast from there and allow the people in and around that community to tell their stories. And I engaged Amakosi Theatre, Kontumhlanga, to say, this is what is happening, and because I knew his views, especially on issues such as what we're talking about, that here is an opportunity for you to go out in the communities so that they can tell their stories in as creative a manner as possible. So I remember in 2002 saying to one of the ZBC reporters during the elections that Harare is not Zimbabwe and Zimbabwe is not Harare. I actually meant it. It was true then, and it is true now, that we need other communities to participate in national institutions by having those institutions located in their neighborhood. So we took SFM away from Harare and took it to Montrose, took Channel 2, which was being used by Joy TV, contrary to the enabling legislation, and we gave it to Montrose Studio to start broadcasting from Bulawayo. And we, in order to get Amakosi to be what it is, a national institution, we said, yes, you've done well for the community here in Bulawayo, but broadcasts from Bulawayo to the nation, have a program. And we set up a program we called Fridays Live from Amakosi, which was a huge success, but the success was short-lived of both the national TV station from Montrose and Amakosi, because in February 2005, I was considered to have dismissed myself from ZANU-PF when I ran as an independent in Cholocho after they declared Cholocho to be reserved for a woman, and Manika said, if you want to run for Cholocho, you must be a woman. And the rest is history. Shortly after that, the Fridays Live from Akose was stopped. The national TV program was stopped, and the entire restructuring exercise, which had taken Power FM to Gweru and SFM to Bulawayo, was reversed. And there was a new restructuring, which was to centralize again. And the idea of giving voices to the community in the hope that even these Gukurahundi stories will now start getting expression ended as far as broadcasting is concerned. But we had also, before I dismissed myself in 2005, started the Lupane State University. I had approached Murerwa to say, look, there is a government policy that each province must have a state university. Matabeleland North does not have a university. And he gave me a blank check to get one started there. And I worked from scratch, and everyone who ended up having something to do with that, including Ncube, who comes from Lupane, who became a member of the foundation committee, was by my invitation. And the idea, because of the historical connection, apart from being the capital of Matabeleland North, it has a lot to do with Gukurahundi and a lot to do with even the making of Zimbabwe as a modern state under King Lobengula. So this was a big opportunity. If you want to understand how we sought to connect Lupane State University with finding a lasting solution for the Gukurahundi challenge in a responsible way, for those who want to invoke that word, look at the motto of Lupane University. It is building communities through knowledge. Building communities through knowledge. I'm happy that they didn't stop or reverse Lupane State University, but I'm unhappy with many other things that have happened there, which have little to do with building communities through knowledge. Safe to say, when I came back to the Ministry of Information in 2013, it was no longer possible to go back to the scenarios that were in front of me in 2005. But there was a new opportunity that is related to this issue. And it is very important for me to mention that opportunity before I finally share with you my specific solution to this problem. By 2013, the long road to liberalizing the airwaves had kind of achieved some milestones. There was now ZFM, and there was a new application for commercial stations. And I again invited Quantum Sang because I used to have a lot of conversations with him, and I found him very clear about what needs to be done and how it should be done. I invited Quantum Sang and Kovani Moyo to apply for station for licenses in Bulawayo in order to have public means of communication for the community to express itself. You cannot deal with this issue and be able to start serious truth-telling if you do not have means or access to means of public communication. So I asked them to apply for a license in Bulawayo, Lupane, and Vic Falls, and brought them, and because I was in very good communication terms those days with SB Moyo and others, and SB Moyo was like the prime minister of the army, was handling the companies and so forth. I said to him, look, listen, why don't you have one of your companies assist these guys who have formed their company, who have 60% of the shareholding, and you get 40% of the shareholding. And that was for the necessary strategy that without them being linked to an element of the state, they were not going to get the license. But also it was important to try and co-opt some organs of the state to say, but you guys, look at what you did. And don't you think this is an opportunity to give back to the community where you did all these dastardly things and so forth? SB Moyo, those days, used to laugh about this kind of stuff. Professor, what are you talking about? And by the time I left the ministry in 2015, unfortunately, not every T had been crossed and not every I had been dotted, but the project had become irreversible. I see what has happened, but I'm not entirely happy with what has happened. But I think there's still an opportunity. Kubani Moyo and Kontemtlanga have an obligation to ensure that these are public means for the communities where these licenses have been granted to express themselves. These are not ZANU-PF opportunities or platforms, but that's a story for another day. I think that it is in the public interest for people to understand things properly. And I wish them well. But if they try to be funny and argue and start challenging things, I don't want to use a threat, but I would be very happy to publish the correspondence in the interest of protecting that public element. Now, against this background, what then should be the basis or specific form of a lasting solution to the Gukurahundi genocide? And I conclude by drawing from my experience. I'm not whistling in the dark, in the wilderness. I'm basing it from my experience. And I suggest to you that there is a need for a methodology that would address 6 levels: the individual level, the household level, the community level, the national level, and the regional level, and the 6th is the international level. Most of the discourse that has gone on Gukurahundi so far has been at the individual level, at the household level, and at the community level. Little has been done, if anything, at the national level, the regional level, and by regional level, I mean SADC, and the international level. The national level, the regional level, the SADC level, and the international levels are the missing links in what has been done. I think that we should try and ask basic questions without belabeling the point, why little has been done at the national level. As far as I'm concerned, if you want to understand this properly, you have to take into account 2 issues. The first issue is that the Gukurahundi period from 1980 to 1990, if you want, or if you want to be specific in terms of the thinking of the Chihambako report, from 1983 to 1987, that period, which is the genocidal period, is in fact considered by many Zimbabweans as the sunshine years of the country, as the best years If people say a lot has gone wrong today, you ask them, when was it right? They'll tell you 1980 to 1990. We had milk all over the place. It was being delivered at home. We were getting scholarships at the university and so forth. And you just have to ask yourself, how is it possible? Can you imagine anyone saying the Holocaust period was also the best period in Germany? And I think our compatriots need to come to terms with the fact that it is not possible for a country's golden age, paradise, to be the same period with genocide. It does not compute. It does not add up. And we need to have a better conversation about that to solve that very serious contradiction. You cannot say the first 10 years of independence are the years of paradise, the paradise lost, the paradise to be regained, when that is the genocide years. That's the first thing. And then I think we should have a conversation. Sometimes it is enough to flag an issue without talking too much about it and expect rational people to interrogate that issue rationally. That's one problem at the regional level. At the national level. We need to move from people thinking this is a Matabeleland problem, this is a ZAPU problem, to understanding that this is in fact a national problem. And one of the reasons, which is the second fact, is that because people thought that is a Matabeleland problem, you see over the years, the Gukurahundi practice, the Gukurahundi mentality, Gukurahundi culture being extended now to the extent that where we are, the Gukurahundi effect pervades the whole country. The use of violence with impunity, the abduction of people all the way from, we can't talk about the Gukurahundi period because it was a period of serious abductions and a lot of people are still missing to this day. But subsequently, the Rashiwe Gujas, the Kenkalas, all the way up to Itai Zamara. You can't solve those abductions without coming to terms with the Gukurahundi, the genocide. You can't deal with the problem of impunity in Zimbabwe at the national level without, And it's not a coincidence that after 2017, there has been a regrouping of Gukurahundi elements across the board. Bureaucrats, securocrats, and the like are now running all over the place, doing exactly what they used to do in Gukurahundi. That stuff, that horrible stuff we saw, which compatriots experienced in the Harare massacre of August 1, 2018, was Gukurahundi coming to Harare. And it's not surprising that even though we are talking about 6 people, and in the other case, we're talking about 20,000 people, the tactics have been the same. No one has been held to account for the justice of those 6 people, even after having some commission, the Montante Commission. In Gukurahundi, it's the Chihambakwe Commission. Here in Harare, it was the Montante Commission, saying that the 6 people who died because of the army guns, the 35 people who were injured critically, army guns, no process to this day. If Gukurahundi had been addressed, I bet my last dollar, the Harare massacre would not have been possible in August 2018. I bet my last dollar, the massacres in January 2019 would not have happened. I bet my last dollar, the 118 people who were abducted between November 2017 and September 6, 2020 would not have been abducted. And what young Tawanda Mcheiwa went through and is still suffering from would not have happened. What is being seen with the handling of Joanna Mamombe and two of her colleagues would not be happening. The incredible jailing of Marco Morero is Gukurahundi style. And it's very clear that they're saying, we will deal with you securocratic style. Forget politics, forget the constitution. In Gukurahundi, they used the Rhodesian state of emergency for 10 years. It was in effect from 1980 to July 1990. People would be put in the court systems, but detained after they've been cleared by the courts for 4 years. The likes of Tabengwa, Lookout Masuku, and many others. That's what is back. And it's being done with impunity because they got away with it. That's at the national level. How about the regional level? Well, the fact that Nyerere triggered this makes it a SADC issue. And it is very important for Chama Pinduzi in Tanzania to understand that we will not be able to solve Gukurahundi in Zimbabwe without them coming to the plate. They must stop what they started, finish what they started. And this is not finger pointing, this is historical. There is no reason why you should have the so-called meeting of former liberation movements, of which Chama Pinduzi is a member, to drink tea and laugh and talk about sanctions and declare 25th October as Sanctions Day on the back of Gukurahundi, which is unresolved. That's not right. It is also important for the ANC to come to the party. They should not say, oh, ZANU-PF is our sister liberation movement. Meanwhile, they know that a trigger of Gukurahundi was the abuse of the Umkhonto, the freedom fighters who were in Zimbabwe, whose weapons and so forth were falsely attributed to Zipra and Zapu, and many of whom were declared refugees and sent away to Zambia. There was a serious working relationship between Zipra and Umkhonto freedom fighters. And that relationship was exploited to justify Gukurahundi. You cannot expect Zapu, Zipra, communities in Matabeleland to solve this problem alone as if you had nothing to do with it, when in fact you were part of it. Come to the party. ZANU-PF must understand that not only does it have individual, household, community, and national problems, it must understand that it is a regional problem to finish. That's how you find a lasting solution. But if the region pretends, no, that is a domestic issue, when they were party to the triggering of this issue, that's not right. Lastly, the British government was complicit through a conspiracy of silence. The British government also takes the view that the first 10 years were wonderful until they started grabbing land from white farmers. That's what was wrong. That's what raised a governance issue. That is not historical correct. It's the same position taken by the white Commonwealth, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. They wanted to convince themselves and their populations that this government was wonderful for the first 10 years, and it lost its ways when it started grabbing land, and the struggle for democracy in Zimbabwe started in 2000. So you want to cover up for genocide by rewriting history? I think it is very important and would be very effective for the British government to revisit its engagement. After all, researchers like Stuart Doran and others, student researchers who are doing PhDs and so forth, are coming up with, they're taking advantage of freedom of information legislation in the UK, the US, Australia, Canada, to get access to amazing cables, which show that these governments knew what was going on when people were being massacred and kept quiet and started making noise when it was too late. And when they started making that noise, it was muted. When the government came up with the Chihambakwe Commission, it designated ministers to debrief embassies, and they said, thank you, thank you. So there's an opportunity to say, now that we see the connection between Gukurahundi and the current state of the situation in Zimbabwe, let's have a solution that is comprehensive, that deals with the problem from 1980 to now. And I think that as Zimbabwe applies for readmission to the Commonwealth, an important item, agenda item, should be the resolution of Gukurahundi. It would be unfortunate to resolve this or to engage Zimbabwe, for the Commonwealth to engage Zimbabwe on terms that exclude Gukurahundi. So what should we do? I think we should forget about the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission. I think what we need as a way forward, the best way forward to find a lasting solution is to come up with an international commission of inquiry, not an NPRC, but an international commission of inquiry represented at the 6 levels that I've outlined. Of course, the rest will be in the detail, and in that detail, you will also find the devil. But this is what is important. As to the terms of reference of that commission, I think we need an honest public debate. But outside an international commission or a fact-finding kind of commission that would look at these issues from 1980 to now, it will not be possible to come up with a lasting solution to the Gukurahundi genocide. I thank you.
Thank you, Prof, for your sterling contribution to this debate. We are very grateful for your take on the situation. It was quite comprehensive. I'm sure our discussants will have quite a lot to say about it. I have looked at our participants and I haven't seen anyone who was not around who would need me to summarize what has been said. I'm sure it is very clear, and therefore we will move straight to our discussants. Pastor Ramos, are you on board? Could you come in on your
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Could you please come in on that one? And thereafter we'll have Dr. Samukele Hadebe, and then the Prof will come in, and then we'll have our plenary.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Prof. Moyo. Always very, very inspiring and encouraging to hear from you, especially your very, very open views and sometimes quite insightful ideas. And we thank you very much for also some of the information that some of us previous and the opportunity that you had to interact with some of these people. And that information to us is very valuable. About the fact that there's need for a comprehensive change, comprehensive solution for Gukurahundi. The reason being, it has taken a considerable length of time without any solution, and therefore it cannot be a piecemeal approach. We need to find ways and means of how to deal with this. But also importantly, you mentioned the need for us to recognize that the problem of crime against humanity has been perpetuated and resulted into the crisis that Zimbabwe has found itself in even today, and given opportunity to the current regime to continue to perpetuate this kind of violence. And how do we find that national approach to do this? You then brought in the opportunity that came through the Hambakwe, but you made it very clear to us that the Hambakwe was inadequate and the Hambakwe was not complete, and that it would not be able to bring about the solution. Some of us really connect the Hambakwe solution with the Dumbujena solution, as well as part of the reason why the government has not been able to be forthcoming in bringing this. Why is it necessary for us to look for a solution is the question that you raised. I think you raised very fundamental issues there. Number one, the need for justice for victims. Number two, the need to bring healing or enable healing, but also equally telling to hold the perpetrators accountable for the sins and injustices that they have committed. But above all, when you look at the people of Matabeleland and the people of Midlands, the need for communities to be reconciled. Probably to add to that is to reconcile with themselves and to reconcile with what happened, and also to be able to find solutions as to why something of that nature could happen, particularly to children and women who did not understand why and what was going on. That was very, very important. You also went to talk about the how. How will we manage to bring about the justice, accountability, healing, and reconciliation? And in doing that, you talked about the need for methodology. And in the discussion of that methodology, you then brought about the issue of truth-telling, which is very critical. How could we solve a problem that we don't know about? How could we solve a problem that victims have not been given an opportunity to say why, to say what it is that happened to them? And again, that is still part of the problem that we solve, that we need to solve. But you also talked about, probably most of us thought that the National Peace and Reconciliation was going to be the means through which some of these things can happen or could happen. But you also then threw some light to the reason why you do not believe that the brief, the design and objectives of the formation of the National Peace and Reconciliation was never to resolve Gukurahundi. And it does not have the capacity, let alone the ability, even when you look at the commissioners themselves who have been chosen and the basis on which those commissioners have been chosen. It has been proved beyond shadow of doubt, even for most of us who have been watching and following this particular commission. It is one of the most truthless commissions that you can ever imagine. And so one of the issues that I think has been very telling is some of the ways and means in which, in your own way, at a personal level, you felt that there may be an opportunity that had been afforded to you in order to bring about some change and means and ways in which probably Gukurahundi or the genocide could actually be addressed. And when you soon realized that it was not possible, you then embarked on a different approach of how to bring about that change. And one of the key issues that I want to highlight that you mentioned is, why would the country, especially the new regime, which calls itself the Second Republic, be quiet about one of the darkest periods of our country, if they were there in order to bring about progress for this country? And that is very, very helpful, because they have been quiet about some of these things as well. And you also made, to me, very, very good, important point where you said, how can a genocide be a bygone? And I think it's something that people need to continue to reflect on. How can a genocide be a bygone? Because the legacy of genocide will not only linger for this generation, but for many, many generations to come. And therefore, there's need, like you rightly said, to find a comprehensive solution to deal with that. And you said part of what has been done are all anecdotes, who will not be able to be fundamental, to be comprehensive, even though you are so grateful to the body of information about Gukurahundi that has been amassed through the international community and the scholars throughout the community that have brought things together for us. And you also then made a very clear conclusion that with no truth-telling, there will not be a lasting solution. And I'd like to probably give my colleague an opportunity by mentioning the fact that in your suggestion of the methodology, you said there must be means and access to communication. And so I think personally, you told us that as a key point, because you were also trying to explain why you felt you needed to do what you did by bringing about some change from inside, because you wanted to make sure that people of Matabele and Midlands had access to communication, and that they in themselves will be able to tell and find solutions for themselves. Because if people of Matabeleland are not able to do that for themselves, nobody was going to do it. And lastly, you then, in your methodology, gave us the need for Gukurahundi or the genocides to be dealt with at an individual level, at a house level, at a family level, at a community level, at a regional level, and at an international level. You then highlighted the critical aspect of the need for the international level to come in, especially when you consider the role that the international and regional bodies played in facilitating and supporting the genocide, especially in the period and the contradiction where most people in Zimbabwe were thinking the glory days are between 1980 and 1990, and yet those are the darkest years of our time. And therefore, Zimbabweans, as a national community, must find solutions and answers of why such a dichotomy should take place. And I will conclude that the British and the regional, through the regional political bodies, must be brought in order to help. Thank you very much. I leave it here and I open to my colleague to come in before we have the plenary session. Dr. Hadebe.
Well, thank you very much, Pastor Ray Motsi. Dr. Hadebe, Professor Moyo said anecdotes cannot be the basis of this lasting solution on the Gukurahundi genocide, and emphasized the importance of truth-telling as part of achieving the lasting solution that we are all yearning for. What is your take on that one?
Thank you, Comrade Moyer, and thank you, Dr. Pastor Ray Motsi, for setting the ball rolling, and Professor Moyo for that powerful presentation. You said you were wearing your academic hat and not the political hat, but I could see you were taking no prisoners and there were no sacred cows, which we are grateful for. This is a very serious issue. And before coming to the way you have posed it, Mr. Ncube, perhaps it's important to recap the issues that were raised by other panelists in this same discussion, since this is a continuation, which of course Professor Moyo also handled, notwithstanding that he didn't have the opportunity to hear the other presenters in the same scope. The issue that is raised, the issue of accountability, which I think it ran across all the presenters. The issue of inadequate research and documentation, which could be used to hold the perpetrators accountable, which of course Prof. Moyo handled differently and gave us a very lengthy background to it. That also answers, Mr. Ncube, the issue of anecdotal evidence, to say these are pieces that are being strewn around for different purposes, but not specifically to come into addressing the issue and seeking justice for the victims and the survivors. But also the important point that also came out clear from Prof. Moyo's presentation, which also came out from other panelists some weeks back, is that the culture of Gukurahundi pervades the whole of Zimbabwe. That also makes it important as we put this into context to see whether there is a lasting solution to the question of Gukurahundi as it were. But as Prof. Moyo was presenting very eloquently indeed, one question kept on lingering to say, could it have been possible to find a solution from within ZANU-PF, or ZANU-PF as an institution? Does it have capacity, not just to mention the political will, to address Gukurahundi? And from ZANU-PF, we extend it to the Zimbabwean state, whether it has from previous or case studies elsewhere, whether a state that is accused for perpetrating genocide or aiding genocide could be part of the solution or could find the solution. But one important point, perhaps, to also highlight and pose some questions for further engagement, is where the Prof put it emphatically that it is not possible to resolve a genocide through any other process that is not based on truth-telling. We all agree. But what can induce truth-telling in our Zimbabwean context? We know we need truth-telling, and given what we have presented, and we appreciate the situation in the context, and that the breakthrough has not been forthcoming, we still want to say, what is it that we need to do as Zimbabweans, as interested stakeholders, to induce that truth-telling, especially from those who are powerful and who hold the information. And I think that is also important. But also, that links to the issue of Gukurahundi. Any revelations on Gukurahundi are central or fundamental to the political architecture of Zimbabwe. As the Prof poses that the Second Republic, in his words, is a second round of the first. So it means it will be difficult for any transition in Zimbabwe as long as the issue of Gukurahundi is swept under the carpet. And then the question, therefore, is this continuation or deterioration politically, economically, and otherwise could hinge on Gukurahundi, and hence the important point that he also raises, which other panelists also raised, to say this should not be seen just as if it were a Matebeleland problem. Of course, the people of Matebeleland are the victims, but this is truly a Zimbabwean problem, if not a regional and international problem, as it has been put. And that puts the context as to say, in seeking for a lasting solution, we should just go beyond limiting it to the area that was hit hardest. But on the issue of evidence, as Mr. Ncube raises the issue of anecdotal evidence to this issue, I didn't hear Professor Moyo helping us as someone who has served at the highest level in government, that the state could be having the raw data of what happened. We can go to university archives and the like, but any military operation, I think the world over, they should keep records of what is happening. And we know we don't declassify like other countries do, but shouldn't that be another avenue to say someone somewhere is keeping the information, because soldiers would know what they did, where and how. So that avenue is part of the information that at a certain point we should perhaps find means of getting it, rather than look for just the commissions written by people who were also using evidence from other sources. But also another point which I felt is important to flag, the issue of periodization, which became a debate, and especially as the Prof raised in ZANU-PF, where the debate starts from whether the debate should, the issue of periodization should start in 1965 UTI or 1890 during colonization, or even prior to colonization. And that is an important aspect perhaps to flag, in a way that periodization here is used as an escape from accountability. And these are issues that perhaps will still live with us as we seek for a solution. And perhaps before one goes to the conclusion, there is a point that is raised from the Prof's experience, which I think is a question that most of us always had, but perhaps is a debate for another day. Why didn't President Mugabe and the late Vice President Gomo address Gukurahundi? I think that's a big question. And perhaps some of these challenges we have today might be of different nature if the two founding fathers of this nation did something about it. And you rightfully say that many years after unity, and it would be a shock that they never talked about such a really dark chapter in the history of the nation. But those are questions that perhaps future research and future, might bring up, and it can help to find out if generations later could address an issue that those who were directly involved and directly intimately involved would not do anything about it, and it would just be a closed chapter. That would be so unfortunate. And of course, I've mentioned the issue that you have put it well, that is not just a material problem, but also the importance that you cannot deal with impunity in Zimbabwe unless you address Gukurahundi. I think that is important as a way of saying seeking for a solution should not be confined to a region, to the affected communities, but it should be a global issue or a national issue as a nation. I think those are important points. Some of them, I think they will come as we debate, but generally, I think it was very comprehensive, raised a lot of issues, some that some of us were not aware as we are also trying to research here and there on this issue. But I think the points were strong, especially the inadequacies of the NPRC by its very foundation, as my colleague has already raised that issue. Thank you so much, Mr. Ncube.
Well, thank you very much.
Mr.
Thank
Ncube,
you
I think
very
there's
much,
one.
Jock.
Mr. Ncube?
Yes, Pastor Motsi.
I think I just need to pose one very key question to the Prof. In his own opinion, is it possible for us to be able to solve issues of the genocide under the current regime, especially when they are the perpetrators of what actually happened? Is it possible? We just need, and I think everybody else needs to hear his opinion on that.
Well, thank you very much, Pastor Dr. Motsi. Prof, would you love to respond to some of the issues that were raised? Just probably take a minute or so before we go to the plenary.
Thank you, Ncube, for emphasizing that I should take a minute, given the crime I've already committed. So I would just first like to thank both Pastor Motsi and Dr. Hadebe for their interventions. And I really don't think that at this juncture it's useful for me to answer any questions, but Pastor Motsi's question was so specific that if I don't answer it, he will feel an injustice when we are talking about justice. My shorthand answer is no. It's obvious that the current government is not interested in finding a lasting solution to this problem. It is also obvious that it lacks the political will and the capacity to do so. Hence my proposal for an international commission represented at those levels. If the government finds that across those 6 levels, there's a consensus to find a lasting solution to Gukurahundi as a way of dealing with the current situation and the future situation, obviously it will have to play ball in the same way it played ball when the surrounding circumstances of the 2018 election after August 1 necessitated an international commission. Whether that was an international commission is another story, but the answer is no. It's finally on that point, Pastor Motsi, as we all know, on the 16th of this month, which is Friday, there are those interviews for the NPRC vacant positions for commissioners. Can you see how sinister this is? How do they have interviews for an NPRC, their own instrument, when there is no vice president responsible for that? And the vice president responsible for NPRC is supposed to come from Hadebe land. And now you have a ZANU leadership wanting to preside over the selection of a key or what should be a key body with no input from the affected communities. They just want to sit alone and do that, and therefore no, they do not have the capacity to or even the will. The rest of the comments I appreciate from both Pastor Motsi and from Dr. Hadebe. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Prof. Ladies and gentlemen, we are running out of time. So what we are going to do is to move as fast as possible towards the conclusion of our meeting. So I will ask our participants, if ever there is anyone with a 5-second, 10-second comment or question to the Prof, we can take those. Anyone from the media, from any of our participants, if anyone has a question, a comment?
Can I come in and intervene here, Mr. Moyer?
Yes, please state your name. What's your name?
Moyo.
Okay, Dr. Mbuso Moyo, please give us your 10-second take of what transpired today.
I really thank the Prof for the insightful presentation and the discussants for their comments and questions. What I really appreciate from the professor is foregrounding the importance of looking at Gukurahundi as a national question. Oftentimes, when the victims of this genocide raise this issue, they are described as OTTC. I think you might remember this, and that Batan Bukala, and that they are particularistic. But I think it is very important that we see this issue as an issue of the future of the nation, and that without it being addressed, it might affect the stability of the nation going forward. And the last question I would like to ask from the professor is whether he still has the video that he presented on the Blue Ocean strategy. I'm just curious. Yes, the question of, I just want to make a suggestion, the question of anecdotal evidence and the lack of evidence, which could be the basis of addressing this serious national question, could be a question that we need to actually to address in the near future by way of beginning to compile the existing extant data and any other anecdotal evidence by way of testimonies, as we have seen with the Zenzel and Debele, interviews and etc. So we should be build a corpus of information on Gukurahundi. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Mr. Nkala, could you please come in with your 10-second intervention?
Sanibonani ekhaya. Igama Nkala uKhanishasi. Ngiyabonga ukuthi kukhona esikuzwileyo sikutholileyo nathi. Kodwa ke nginombuzo wodwa ukuthi njengoba kune information engaka thina abanye sazalwa ngo1982 makufika lesi sikhathi sithola ukuthi information engaka linayo. Senzani ngayo ngoba kumele siphakame senze something okuzakwenza ukuthi lo mhlaba ukubone lokho senzani ngakho njengoba sihlanganisa khona pha sindlu singabakhokheli lengabadala singabantwana kodwa lento iyasidla yasiaffecta sonke. Senzani ngayo ngoba kukhona into kumele siyenze. Ngiyabonga.
Oh, thank you very much. Any other contribution before we go back to Professor Moyo and we close? Anyone? Kumbulani Maposa, could you please come in 10 seconds at most?
Thank you. Just a question. What does it take to set that international commission, which takes representatives at the 6 levels? What does it take?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Before I close on the plenary, is there anyone who wants to come in? Anyone wants to come in because we're closing? When we go back to the professor, we are not coming back to the plenary. Anyone? Or Professor Nkomo, could you please come in?
Just a quick one. Just a quick one. I wanted to find out from the professor that suppose the NPRC is properly constituted, the constitutional mandated to ensure that the NPR constitutional body that is set up, we have a case, as it were. Shouldn't we take this up, like, for instance, to the constitutional court and so forth, instead of trying to create a new thing like having the international commission and so forth, which would be more difficult?
Okay, thank you, Reverend Spanda. Professor Nkomo, could you please come in?
Thank you, Mr. Ncube. I would like to know how the professor responds to arguments that Gukurahundi is still in progress today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Anyone else? Anyone who wants to come in? We are closing. Okay. Professor Panapas Kacheni, please come in.
Okay. Thank you for the insightful talk by Professor Moyo and the discussant. He talked about the socio-economic stuff that has impacted negatively on those communities in the Midlands and Matabeleland who were affected by genocide, implying that the scorched earth policy of government continues up to date, meaning that those communities from the Midlands and Matabeleland are actually being pushed to the periphery of the economy, meaning to abject poverty and toiling in different parts of the world. So now, looking at setting international commission and other commissions until the conclusion of the solution probably might take it might take some 10, 15, or even 50 years. By then, the people will be actually like maybe a zoo in Matabeleland and the Midlands. So how does he respond to that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Can we go to Mhlanhla Moses and Kinako? And with those, I think we are going to close and go back to Professor Moyo.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm Mhlanhla Moses Ncube. I would like to appreciate this opportunity. It's really wonderful for us as Matabelelanders to meet like this. I would request that we continue having meetings like this. And then I also have one question for the professor to say, what does he think Matabeleland should do in order to come right? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ncube. Kinako, please come in. You are the last participant from the plenary, and we will go back to Professor Moyo.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Ncube, and I would like to thank everyone who has been presenting in this conference. My quick question, Professor Moyo Utiena, he looked for the Zimbabwe Commission report, tirelessly looked for it, but could not lay his hands on it. And he said, you know, that report will not tell us anything we don't already know, but its importance lies in it giving us an insight into the minds of the masterminds of Gukurahundi and the perpetrators of Gukurahundi. Now, my question is this, Professor Moyo, now that you are not in government anymore, did you, while you were in government and looking for this report, did you, for want of a better word, did you groom other people, you know, who could continue to look for this document in government offices, you know, or now that you are out of government, that is the end of the quest for this document? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Kinako. Let me go back to Professor Moyo for your responses, for your response to the comments and questions. And could you please, at the end of that, give us your summing up for your closing remarks, let me put it that way.
Thank you very much, Baba Ncube. I took down 8 questions, all of them based on comments which are rich and enriching in and of themselves. And I prefer to note the wisdom behind the what appear to be questions. In fact, when these are useful interventions, and I provide comments, not answers to these issues, because it would be presumptuous to assume that I have the answers to these questions. I know that wise people like the colleagues who have raised these questions make a point by asking a question. And it is important to always ask the right question and not presume that you must run away with your imagination to provide an answer. Some of them were easy, and I start with Dr. Moyo, Mboso Moyo's question, whether I still have the Blue Ocean video. Yes, I do. And could you please give Mr. Ncube your contact information, and if you would be kind enough to share it with me, I would then forward or email or WhatsApp the video. It will be my pleasure to do so. Then Mr. Nkala asks, what are we to do with this information? Public engagement is about praxis. We are to act with this information. How are we to act? This is not the platform for that discussion. But it is always useful to act on information that you have and not to sit on the information. There are other questions that were raised which will bring me back to Nkala's issue. I can appreciate his feeling that we have all the information we need and why are we not doing anything. But of course, you are aware we are suggesting that most of the information we have is anecdotal, and that we need a mechanism or process for a much more comprehensive basis for truth telling, so that it can be acted upon. What does what will it take? What do we need to do? I think what is very important is to engage in public advocacy, which Ipe Chulugazulu is already doing. We need more Ipe Chulugazulus, and we need more people to participate in such initiatives. We need people to support the work that Zenzele Ndebele does at the Center for Information and Technology. Can you imagine what would happen if the path-breaking documentaries that Ndebele has been doing were to be on ZBC? And why are they not on ZBC if ZBC is the public broadcaster? But more specifically, if this is a new dispensation, why would they not show? So it's very important for us to engage in public advocacy and make the right noises. I imagine, for example, that if there could be a position in the affected communities in Matabeleland and the Midlands, which is all the 3 provinces plus that part of the Midlands, to say they would not send anyone to any elective office from local authorities, to the National Assembly and to the Senate, who does not take a position that they want a lasting solution to the Gukurahundi genocide. If you don't support that, we will not support you. We expect you to speak on that. This is what we've seen, for example, with communities in the United States that are pushing the Black Lives Matter movement. And why are institutions in these communities quiet? Can you imagine if the Highlanders executive would meet with President Mnangagwa and not ask for farms and say the community where we are is concerned about finding a lasting solution to Gukurahundi and Mr. President, what is your party? What are you? What is your government doing about this? It's that engagement that we should see in our communities. This idea that it takes Ipe Chulegazulu and SITE and organizations like that to raise these issues and everyone else is quiet makes it very difficult to find a lasting solution. Let every voice, especially cultural and community voices, and sporting institutions, especially historic ones like Highlanders and others, would do well to speak as neutral but formidable voices on an issue as crucial as genocide. We are not asking people to support political parties or politicians, but we are asking them to speak out in favor of finding a lasting solution to the Gukurahundi genocide. And Reverend Banda raises an issue that is legitimate about NPRC and why not let it continue because it's already constituted. I did not say that it must discontinue. It should continue, but we must not be blind to what it is doing. I think the fact that the government wants the 10-year lifespan, which has 3 or so years to go, to lapse and get rid of this is very telling. And if you bank on that basket and put all your eggs in that basket, rest assured that there will not be a lasting solution. And in any event, the NPRC has not shown the capacity or interest to rope in other very critical players in this at the regional SADC level, at the level of the international community, and the government just doesn't want to do that. Therefore, I think we should let them continue with their charade, but they might change their ways if they start seeing community, national action. You know, they themselves have not said that this is genocide, and we have pointed out that there's already some anecdotal evidence there. The NPRC's approach to evidence gathering is itself very in clear and unfortunate ways more anecdotal than what we have. It is an anecdotal approach to getting research, getting information. Please send us this, send us that. They don't have a systematic way of information gathering. So, no, we don't want to do away with them, but also their inherent limitations are so obvious to everyone that something else needs to be done at the very least to complement what they are doing, or to do better what they are not doing. Professor Nkomo asks whether Gukurahundi is still in progress today. The answer is, of course, yes. I mean, how can you be in a country 41 years after independence, 34 years after the Unity Accord, where the commander of the Zimbabwe National Army is a former commander of the 5th Brigade that massacred people in Matebeleland South, and who went public boasting about the colors matters and saying we are here to do a job and we are doing our job. One thing that is very, very wrong in Zimbabwe, which demoralizes a lot of people, is that public offices, critical public offices, are staffed by people who played dastardly roles during the Gukurahundi, and that information is in the newspapers. You would not. Can you imagine a Holocaust perpetrator being a commander of the armed forces in Germany? Is that even possible? Can we contemplate? I think that is contemptuous treatment of the public, and that is one of the things that is wrong with the country. So, and if you look at the reports that come up about extrajudicial killings and so forth and abductions of people, most of those are taking place in Matabeleland, even to this day. But the critical point is that the Gukurahundi mentality, culture of impunity, of violence, of abduction, is now a national preoccupation of the state. It is the manifesto of the state. It is the ideology of the state. It's very daring. Today, there's a report that has just come out from Cabinet that they are reintroducing the National Youth Service. And that is an instrument of violence anticipating the 2023 elections. And a government unable to attend to basic issues around livelihoods of the people wants to allocate scarce resources to a national youth service. To do what? So yes, it is in progress, and yes, it will continue if people do not speak out in the public interest, because we are not in this case, if we're talking about genocide as we are, this is a crime against humanity. It is not a political party issue. And this is why, in the end, it is an international issue. It's an issue for the international community. Professor Gachene's take on marginalization was very instructive, raised as a question, and yet making very telling points. I don't want to pollute those points by commenting further. I want them to stand unpolluted because I agree with them. Mhlanhla Moses Ncube ask, what should Matabeleland do to come right? Well, it's a pregnant question. And I know that there are all sorts of issues that have been placed on the agenda out there. I think a constitutional democracy should allow the ventilation of those issues. Matabeleland should speak out. But I understand the frustration in Matabeleland. They spoke out and voted in a particular way in the 2000 election, only to find that other parts of the country voted differently. The same happened in 2005 and so forth. But you never tire to speak out. And as I suggested earlier, hold everyone who seeks public office to account on the Gukurahundi issue, on the genocide issue. Kenako, the last question says, now that you are, says when you were in government, you were looking for the Chihambakwe report and you didn't get it. Were you wise enough to leave someone or groom someone who would continue looking for it when you're out as you are? No, you don't groom people to look for it. One of the reasons why it's important to have these platforms and to raise these issues is that hopefully someone is listening, and then someone else will do the right thing. Isn't that the value and utility of exchanging ideas? However, I do fear that this current government, if it is aware whether the report was left at State House, whether the report is the CIO section at the National Archives, we now have a government that is capable of destroying that report. The people who are key in this government are the same people who destroyed the ZAPO archives. They burnt them. You know, they use the Leninist approach. You tell a Leninist that there's a subway in New York, and you say, well, they will not be tomorrow because we're going to bomb them. So you tell them there's a report and you are looking for it. They'll wake up tomorrow and just destroy it. We are not dealing with a government that values information. They believe that information or data is dangerous to the state. But I'm sorry, Kanako, I didn't groom anyone. Finally, I have spoken enough. Sometimes if you say more than enough, you create problems, Baba Ncube. My closing remark really is to thank you for the gallant work that you are doing as Ipe Zulu. And I agree, I can't remember which colleague raised that point, but it was that it is very good to have this kind of discussion. Let's have more of them, pointed discussions, and let us focus on this particular issue. Let us make other people outside Matabeleland not afraid of the discourse. There's a lot of demonization that takes place to say, don't listen to Ncube, Alimazino Ncube, and as for the page, oh no, that's anarchist, they want to secede. Successionists think their opponents are secessionists. That's what they do. This, especially this Lacoste think that. It is very important to be nuanced in a situation like this, to engage in order to achieve a purpose, to be multifaceted in the approach that you take. If we say this is a national issue, let's then act nationally at the local level. That's how we will reach out. But if you say it's national and you are threatening to exterminate other people because they did this and that, then instinctively they will resist the message. A lot of people in public platforms say to me, well, now you're talking about Gukurahundi, but you didn't talk about it when you were in government. That kind of view, apart from being false, doesn't understand that when you are inside, the methods that you use are different from those when you are outside. There's no reason for an outsider to behave like an insider. And there's no reason for an insider to behave like an outsider. I mean, a question that was raised, I think, but it was part of the comment, but I pointed, or at least said something about it, is the fact that Mugabe and Nkomo failed to address this. People want Jonathan Moyo to have succeeded inside ZANU-PF when Nkomo and Mugabe failed for 12 years. And they want Jonathan Moyo to have succeeded for 7 years and interrupted the presence in 7 years. Perhaps, because times differ. But if you were to genuinely ask me why Nkomo and Mugabe failed to solve this problem, from what I gathered, it's because Zimbabwe has been a military state, and the most decisive organ of the state is the military. And they did not want to cooperate. They considered it a done issue. They think that they would be the losers. Why? I mean, if people set up a whole brigade, the whole CIO experience, how can an independent country which fought against a state of emergency spend 10 years under that state of emergency? I mean, these Zimbabweans who say that the first 10 years were sunshine years, if they don't want to talk about Gukurahundi, how do they explain that those 10 years were state of emergency, where there was a legalized arbitrary rule? How do you explain that? So I think that we have an opportunity, and I hope through these kinds of discussions using technology, the Zulu site, I know site is doing excellent work in that regard, will go technological. I think we need to discover technological-based ways of engaging the state in terms of generating and disseminating relevant information. And when people have relevant information, they usually are bound to act. Once again, Baba Ncube and your colleagues, I would like to thank you for this opportunity. And I am sure from what I've been exposed to that you are going to continue doing this. And in very small ways, and where some of us in the streets that we walk, we will support this kind of work that you do, and resist suggestions that you are renegades, you are anarchists, and yet you are addressing a fundamental national question that has not been resolved for 41 years. So for me, as I commemorate our independence on Sunday, I will be grateful for the contribution that you're making. Thank you.
Unmute yourself, Ms. Ncube.
With those words, thank you very much for your contribution, Prof. You have made a sterling contribution to this discussion, gave us all sorts of information that we will engage on as we move forward. We are also grateful for our participants, our discussants. Their contribution was also very much spot on. For that, we thank you all. Thank you very much. Our meeting has come to an end. Next time we invite you, please show up and do participate as you have done today. Thank you very much to you all.